good. Perfect streaming.
All right, guys, welcome to Tightline Live. I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. Guys, this entire show is brought to you by Bass Pro Shop. So a huge thanks to Bass Pro for giving us this platform, allowing us to go live, and hopefully making everyone a much better angler, catching more and bigger fish. You guys also might be watching on the Bass Pro Denver page here locally, as well as the Tightline Outdoors page. So again, huge thanks to everybody for watching. Again, I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky, guys. We got Devin Menino right here behind the camera. He's running the scenes. Remember, guys, this is all about engagement with you, the audience. So if you have questions, you have anything you want to talk about fishing related, send your question in. Devin here will read it on the air, and we'll answer those questions, live right here. And I'll tell you what, tonight is a very special night. The main concept of tonight, we're going to be talking about early spring bass fishing. And I'll tell you, when you talk about bass fishing in general, you know, there's so many big names we could bring on here to answer your questions. But we got a special one. There's no name out there bigger, the guy that is more versatile, a guy that's involved more than Mr. Randy Howell, guys. Randy's going to be coming on here in about 10 minutes. Guys, so again, right now, grab the popcorn, sit down, get comfortable. Guys, we got Randy Howell coming on here real shortly. Guys, and I promise you, this is a show to make sure that you pay attention to. You're going to want to take notes, because I promise you all this stuff is going to make you a better fisherman, let alone how often do you get to have a chance to ask Randy Howell questions. I mean, seriously. I mean, how often do you get to ask, the Bassmaster Classic winner, a guy with this kind of background questions? So again, make sure you stay tuned, guys. Randy Howell coming up here real shortly. But with the concept of early spring bass fishing, we do a lot of it, and really depending on where you're at in the country, you talk early spring. You're in Florida and Georgia, you're warming up, and you guys say, oh, early spring for us is early February, or depending on where you're at. Other places you talk to a Minnesota angler, a guy in the Midwest that does a lot of bass fishing. You look at that big turnout they had last year at Mille Lacs, one of the first big bass tournaments they had in the Midwest there. And early spring for them is in May. So it really is a broad question of what early spring and spring tactics are for you, the angler, depending on which region you're watching from. And again, we have listeners from everywhere. I mean, where are you watching from? Right now, comment. Tell me where you're at. You in Canada? You in Florida? You in Colorado? Where are you at? Comment those questions. I want to know where you guys are listening from. But with that being said, talking early spring bassing, the number one thing that I want to talk about to start off this show is using electronics. I think that so much of the sport of bass fishing, especially on our summer tactics, so many anglers are using literally amazing graphs, amazing tools of any brand. They're using literally the best fish finders in the world and graphs and mapping, and so many of it use it as a glorified depth finder. All they do is look at some depth, make sure they're not running over anything, and then they're looking at contours. They're focused on the shore. And very few, especially summer bass fishermen, are utilizing their electronics for what they should be. And that's where we want to start off the topic is, number one, in all situations, 365 days a year, you need to be trusting your electronics. You need to be utilizing your graph for everything, for finding fish, for having better maps and contours, GPS trails, just everything to make you a better angler. Now, I know a lot of you do that, but a lot of us don't do that. So we got to really put an emphasis on electronics in the game. And when you start talking about early bass fishing, hands down, electronics make or break your day on the water. Because again, so many of us go off tradition. And when I say tradition, we're going off, last year, 2 years ago, the years past, where we had a good day on the water. We're like, hey, we're going out here March 15th, some bass fishing. I remember that, that day we had, a year back or 2 years back, we pounded them. But I'll tell you what, if you actually write down conditions, water temperature, and just various things, water level and everything that's happening, very rarely is a body of water the same 1 year to the next, let alone 2 to 3. So things that you might have done in the past, it very well could work, but it also very well could not work and leave you stranded. So every time we get on the water, especially early in the year like we are right now, I'm putting 100% focus into my graph, into my electronics. And I'm spending as much time graphing as I actually am fishing. Now that'll change down the road. Once I know what's going on, once I know the patterns, I know what the fish are feeding, and I know where the food's at, I know all that information, then I spend a lot more time fishing. But there's times where literally early in the season, I might go out and do nothing but graph. I literally might get out there and spend almost all my time behind that fish finder, just staring at it, checking water temperatures, looking for food, looking for forage base, looking for the big bass, looking for a plan of where they are now and where they're gonna be. But again, graphs are absolutely huge for that matter. And again, we always question how many times are you actually utilizing that and looking at it. The big thing that we also talk about with the utilization of using graphs and electronics to make you a better angler is, a portion of the year. I mean, it really depends on where you're at and, if you're fishing smallmouth versus largemouth for spots and everything else. But right now when that water's cold, generally speaking, your bass going to be in that deeper water. When they're in that deeper water where they allow you to run over them. If a bass is sitting in 4 or 5 feet of water and you run over them, they kick to the side. They don't want that motor running over them. But if they're in 10, 12, 18 feet of water, you can go over them with that boat and you can see them down there and they don't get spooked at all. So all of a sudden now you have unbelievable information that you can play with the rest of the year. All of a sudden you have a data collection. So now you can go out there, when you go over these wintering pods of fish, in these early spring cold water pods of fish, you can see true numbers. You can come into a big finger of a lake and you can start graphing these fish off points, off submerged trees and wood and all the different structures that you have. And all of a sudden you can tell yourself, hey, this particular bay, this finger, this edge of the lake, or whatever portion you're fishing is absolutely chock full of fish. Because when they're deeper, you can see them all. You can use your electronics and you can see all the fish there. And then as the water warms and they start to disperse, at least you know they're there. As opposed to you pull into another area, another bay, and you say, man, I'm not seeing as many fish. As the water warms and they scatter, in those situations they're going to scatter even further apart. And it might not be that ideal situation. So again, utilizing electronics this time of the year, you can set yourself up for the entire season. You're going to study the fish. You're going to learn how many numbers are, what they're looking like, how they're relating to structure. And it's really going to fine-tune that and help you become a better angler. The other thing we talk about, guys, is the use of structure scan. So whether you're talking side imaging or whatever, you're shooting, you're basically, your transducers, you're getting an image from the side of your boat. That's another thing that I think is absolutely huge. Because again, we all utilize things for different situations. Whether you're cruising next to a boat dock and you're looking underneath that dock with your graph, or you're running over, we fish some rivers, and a lot of times you'll have big barges on the side of the rivers, especially this time of year. Those big barges will warm up because they're steel. The sun hits them. It'll actually warm the water around that area just a little bit in these backwaters, and you'll come cruise underneath and look into those barges with that side imaging, and get a great idea for what's underneath it. So again, so many of us use it to look for fish, but how many of you are actually looking for other things, such as future structure? Hey, how many submerged stumps do I have? What's a tree area? What's going on that true side imaging? More importantly for me, I look for fishable areas, especially this time of year when the fish are gravitating to deeper sections of the lake. They love having access to deeper water. So especially as your transition, as your fish start coming out of that deeper water, moving a little bit shallower, as that water warms, they love being near a channel edge or near a drop-off somewhere where they can retreat out of that shallow water and drop into a little bit of depth to give them comfort. So I can take that side imaging and I can literally cruise down a shore, and even if it's nothing more than little ditches, or maybe even have trees and wood everywhere, then you have a little open area, basically making a little canal. Literally, I will plan my cast. So there's times where I'll cruise down a bank and I'll literally see these openings and I'll plan my cast accordingly, knowing that the fish are gravitating to those little deeper water sections to make sure that they have comfort to sneak in and out of those spots. So again, the overall concept of graphing with everything that you do, from locating fish to locating structure to chasing water temperatures, are all keys that are going to make you a better angler. But again, so many of us don't use our graphs for that. We use them early in the year. We're checking depths, checking a few things. But very rarely are we glued to our electronics. And this time of year, that's really going to separate some of the good days from the bad days on the water, is knowing what you're on, knowing what the fish are doing. The other big thing that we talk about, guys, before we bring on Randy here, is talking about staying on top of your fish. And that ties right into the concept of electronics and using your graph to better up your odds when you're on the water, is knowing what your fish are going to do. And I ask that all the time. If you look at the average angler, I think so many people are right on the cusp of doing good and or just behind the scale. they're just right behind the bite. You know, they're still catching fish. You know, one day they catch it right, then the next day they don't have such a good day. And they're always one step behind the scale, as opposed to somebody like Randy Howell, who is on the bite and is one step ahead. And the reason I ask this, how many of you right now, watching right now, how many of you are that angler that goes out and has a great day, then you have a poor day, then you have a decent day, then you have a great day, then you have a terrible day, and it's just always up and down. You pound them one day, and you're off the next. And a lot of times, especially in spring, you know, as these fish, you know, number one, come out of deep water, come up shallow, then prepare to spawn, and they come out of spawn, they go back deep, and there's a lot of fluctuation of what the fish do on a daily migration or a monthly migration this time of year. And being a step ahead of these fish to catch them where they are now, but anticipate where they'll be tomorrow or the next day. Learning that anticipation, learning to stay one step ahead of the fish can absolutely be crucial to increase your odds and catch fish on a daily basis. And again, staring at graphs, knowing where the early bloomers are, per se. Again, it's not all like everything happens at once. You always have the first fish to move shallow, the first fish to come up in a certain area. Then you have the bulk of them. Then you have your tail end, you know, your late bloomers that come in. And it's nice to see the fish always come in stages, because again, that's your sign as an angler of what the fish are doing. Everybody focuses on the bulk of the fish, but if you kind of watch the beginning of the migrations or the beginning of the movement, watch the tail end of the movement, you can start to time things. And if you stare at your electronics enough and you watch the fish and pay attention to all the minor details that the fish are telling you, you can learn to anticipate their next move, to be on top of them, and therefore catch more fish at the end of the day. Those are the small things that will make you a better angler. Those are the small things, like our next guest coming up here in just a second, Mr. Randy Howell, do to help them catch more fish. So Devin's going to pull up the phone right now, guys. We're going to give Randy a call. We're going to pull him on here live. So again, right now, in the comments, share this, tag a friend. If you guys have somebody who's watched Randy Howell on TV, or you've watched him win a classic, or you've seen him in action, you know he's a guy that you would love to have these questions with. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to put my earpiece in, we're going to pull on Randy. But again, share this right now, bring in these questions. I promise you guys, this is the guy that you want to ask questions to, you want to have answers from, and you want to hear from of how he has became the legend that he is. So guys, again, Mr. Randy Howell. Randy, how are you doing, sir?
Great, Nate. How you doing?
Man, I am awesome, and I tell you what, I cannot thank you enough for coming on this feed. It's an honor to have you on here, man, so I really appreciate that.
Man, it's an honor to be on there with you guys. My buddy Jared Edwards talks so good about you guys. I'd love to get out on the water one day, but this will do for now, right?
Absolutely, man, absolutely. You know, it's so great. So we're doing this feed, and we're looking at the comments, and we have people coming in from all over the country. I mean, Florida to California. We got some guys watching in Canada. So there's people all over the place. So we're talking about early spring bass fishing and using your electronics to stay on top of the fish. And that's what we want to talk to you about, literally a legend in the bass fishing world. I mean, a classic winner. You've been there with everyone. And how do you approach the first question? How do you approach early spring? I mean, what's your step? I mean, obviously you come into tournaments where you've never fished that water before, and you obviously, pull your game together and do great. How do you approach an average early spring fishery?
Well, Nate, that's a really good question. I know everybody thinks we have magical powers, when we show up out on the tour and we bring in 5 good fish and nobody sees the 8 hours of hard work that went into it. It just looks like we got it all figured out. A lot of times we caught our last fish at 5 minutes to go to weigh-in, so nobody ever sees that part. But what I do, that's why I'm a big shallow water cranking fisherman, and I've learned over the years of being consistent on tour, to make classics and make a living, sustaining over the years fishing. If you get good at crankbait fishing, which is not just deep water at all, but all your mid-depth to shallow cranking and lipless crankbaits, that whole, spectrum there, that's a good way to catch fish early in the year. And when our tournaments start in February, really February all the way through June, I'm all about, cranking my Livingston Howler square bill or my regular, 8 to 10 foot diver and just covering water, keeping that bait in contact with rocks, wood, or something over grass. That's usually how you catch your fish and find fish when you don't know anything about a lake.
Absolutely. And I think that's a huge thing to state, because Number one, I mean, fish in general. Let's say you're bass. Let's say you're walleye. Let's say anything. Cranks are always going to produce some of the biggest fish out there. So I think that's huge because even in a given area, generally speaking, you throw plastics, you throw cranks, you're going to catch slightly bigger fish on cranks. So I think that's a huge thing. And I think the one big thing with shallow cranking is everybody gets worried about the wood. Everybody gets worried about losing lures. They get so concerned with the snags that they avoid unbelievable fish in fishing. And I think it's one of those things that you have to go out there, you have to have a couple good days, catch some big fish, and you get over that fear because you know what the overall achievement can be.
That's right, and that's the question I get. Like this past 2 weekends, working the Bass Pro Shop Spring Classic, in Nashville and Kodak, Tennessee. I do the seminars on the tank, talk all about making contact with your crankbait, and that's the biggest question I get. And a concern is guys say, "Man, if I pay $10 for your howler crankbait, I don't want to throw it in the middle of some wood and break it off. I don't get them free, man." And I'm like, "Man, I don't like to break mine off either. It's okay, but you got to get that bait in there where the fish are." And that's why I've helped design my baits that I put my name on to be able to bounce out of cover really good. I mean, that one crankbait that I won the Classic on in 2014, it was honestly the only bait I had in the boat that day. It was a prototype bait. I didn't have but one, and I caught probably 100 bass on it that day and never broke that bait off. And I still have it in my trophy case right now, and I never lost it. I hung it up 25 times, but it always comes loose because the way the lip design, it backs out of cracks and backs out of rocks. And if you do get it hung, it's usually going to be 8 foot deep or less. And my 7-foot Daiwa rod, I can reel the rod tip down and poke it loose most of the time. And if I can't get it that way, I can just drop a little weight on a snap, kind of like a snap swivel, little pocket weight. I keep them in my cup holder, drop it on the line, knock it loose, and get that bait loose. But you've got to get it in the nasty stuff to catch the big bass.
Man, that's awesome. I tell you, I can't imagine. We go on a guide trip and we get low on plastics or low on a crank, and I'm sweating. And I just got, I got a guest that's just trying to catch some fish on vacation. You're at a Classic and you got one bait. The first time that bait got stuck, I'd be sweating so bad I'd look uncomfortable, man. I mean, that's awesome. Tell us about what went into that bait real quick before we take some questions. I mean, what went into the prototype of that bait? What are your thoughts when you're helping make a bait?
Well, back on that bait originally, I'm from North Carolina originally before I moved to Alabama, so I grew up in the crankbait king area, where David Fritz come from and Gerald Beck, Jerry Lohr, a lot of the old wooden crankbait guys. So I grew up under those guys, and I love the old Bagley Killer B2s from the old days that had the long bill with the narrow area right at the nose and had the weight out on the lip. Those baits would vibrate really hard, and they would go in and back out of cover really good, and I rarely ever hung them up, and I caught a lot of fish on them, So I wanted to make that Livingston bait, out of plastic with the electronic bait fish and crawfish sound, and I wanted that bait to have that same quality but be out of plastic and be, castable and be able to tune it good and just kind of have all those qualities with that electronic bait fish sound. So that's what took so long to get it, tweaked and perfected, and and then the rest was history after that when we put it on the map with that Classic. So since then, though, I catch them on the whole family of my howler baits everywhere I go, all colors. But springtime crawfish is the dominant bait. Everybody needs to use a crawfish color this time of the year to be successful.
Man, that's awesome. Because everybody asks that. What's the number one color? What's the number one bait? That's huge. Everybody remember that. The man himself right now just told you that crawdad's that color. Now I think we got a question here. Devin's going to read it out for us.
Okay.
Hey Randy, so we got quite a few questions asking about deeper water bass, and this one in particular, he's more of a finesse fisherman, shallow, has no idea how to catch fish in deeper water than 8 feet. Can you help him out?
Okay, no, he doesn't know how to catch fish in water deeper than 8 feet. Is that right?
Correct.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, that's correct. All right. Well, I would advise he not even fish much deeper than 8 feet because if he in the spring. Like I said, get that crankbait. I keep my boat in 10 feet or less, and I keep that crankbait making contact with riprap along the rocks and around bridges and, bluff walls, and keep my bait pretty shallow. I don't fish deep very much myself until the summer or the early fall when you have to fish deep. Go with your strength and stay in that shallow spectrum early in the year, and those bigger fish are moving up shallow, eating a lot before they spawn. So that's what I'd advise you do. Stay up there in that shallow water. That's where those bigger ones are coming to.
That's cool. We actually had this conversation over the weekend. Same thing. I was at the Bass Pro Spring Classic, and I'm talking to a bunch of guys, and everybody's talking about the masses versus the individuals. And this question came in a walleye situation. They're like, "Hey, man, we're good at this technique versus that, and finding the right fish. If you're struggling with a certain technique, find the fish that you're comfortable with catching. Again, you have the options to target everything or target the individual fish. So again, you always have those options, and if those bigger fish are available, obviously shallow water is much easier to approach. I think that's a huge thing to think about, using electronics and finding the fish of your choice.
That's right, and that's the way I'm all about it. Don't go out there, especially if you're a weekend angler and you only have 1 or 2 days off work to go fishing. You don't need to go out there and beat yourself up trying to learn something that's going to take you a long time to learn. If you just go out there and have fun and go fishing and keep it simple, and eat crawfish in the spring, and I put crawfish crankbait on, I get it on the bank, and I start covering water, and you'll start catching fish if you do that, especially if you go up in the creeks and find stained water. That's where you can usually get that shallower bite where you find some color in that water.
Now, we worried about temperature in that situation, so we're looking for color. We got the crawdad pattern. What about temperature? Are we seeking out certain temperatures, in your opinion?
If you can get a few degrees warmer, usually going up in creeks, you can get warmer water, especially in the southern part of the country where we are. Most of the rain we have this time of the year is warmer rain than the air temperature has been, and than the water temperature. So like on Lake Guntersville, for instance, where I live, the water was 38 degrees. We were frozen over in the creeks for a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden we had 2 or 3 days of 60-degree rain, and it warmed that water up into the 50s pretty quick. And those fish go right into those creeks where all that runoff comes into those creeks. And that kind of happens everywhere in the whole Ozark area. It's real big, and all the central states and even the southern states. I'm sure out west, that resonates well out there too. So just look for that. Once the water passes 50 degrees, that's my safe number for knowing you can move around and fish fast with crankbaits and catch fish.
That's awesome. That's a great tip. 50 degrees is your number. Remember that. Write that down. Everybody should be taking notes. All right, Devin's got another question for us.
What tournament are you looking forward to the most this upcoming season?
Man, that's an easy one right now, is the Bassmaster Classic. That's the most exciting. That's why I'm sitting out here in my garage right now. If you can tell, I'm sitting out here in my garage. If you could see around me, I've just got a surrounding of a big mess of rods and bags of tackle. I got all my Bass Pro bags over here from the weekend, and I'm trying to sort through stuff to take to Lake Hartwell, and that's going to be the Bassmaster Classic March 16th through the 18th, and that's the one we all, work all year to get to, and we want to make a good showing, but you want to win. I know what it's like to win that event after doing it, and I want to win it again so bad, and that's my most exciting, looking forward to event of the year right there.
Absolutely, man. I mean, it should be. I mean, that's the Super Bowl, the whole deal. Now, is this your 16th Classic, Randy?
Yeah, that's correct. It is my 16th one. It's making me start to feel a little older now, but I'm hoping the experience will keep paying off. I'm still learning a lot. I still feel like a kid at Christmas, man, just getting to go to the Classic. It's so exciting being in it. So just having the opportunity to win like I did that year, that was my 12th try when I won it, and so I don't feel like it's greedy to want to win it again at my 16th try. Van Dam, he's won 4 of them. Clun's won 4 of them, so why can't I win 4 of them, right?
I agree with you, man. Absolutely. And, we're wishing you the best of luck. Now, I got a couple more questions here before we let you go. I know you're busy. I know you got a lot of stuff to do. But thinking about the Classic, I mean, literally the biggest tournament in all history, as you prepare for it, obviously it's coming up here very quick. What do you do to prepare? I mean, the phone's blowing up right now with people asking, how do you prep for a tournament? But with the Classic, what are you doing mentally? What are you doing, before you're actually boat on the water? What are you doing to prepare for that type tournament?
Well, that this time of the year, I'm traveling a lot, of course, doing the Bass Pro events and other outdoor shows and meeting and talking to a lot of people. And then after I come home for a couple days during the week, I get back out here in the garage. I get my, little by little, I try to, sort out my tackle, make sure all the controllables that you can control, is what I teach on. You got to have all your baits with the right hooks. Have Daiichi hooks on all my baits. I got stainless steel split rings that don't straighten out. I got all new Gamma line on my Daiwa rods and reels. I make sure everything that I can control is done properly. All my knots are right. And then I pack the boat and have everything ready there. And then I look at a lot of internet reports and read about water levels every day on Lake Hartwell. Lake Hartwell, where we're going for the Classic, the water's risen 7 feet in the past 2 weeks. So that's a lot of fresh water. It's totally changing things. It's a huge warming trend. So we're going to be probably looking at even spawning conditions mixed with a little free spawn. And so I just try to stay on track. We can't get information obviously because it's all off limits, but we can read everything on the internet that's public information and try to just do our homework and check out the lake that way. And then I just mentally I'm just preparation and being real specific and real particular about every detail being right. That's what helps me have confidence, and confidence is what helps you have success and catch fish. So it's all a process, and you have to start with that preparation to get that confidence.
Oh, you're speaking to the choir. I mean, the only thing I go on the water with is confidence. I mean, it's just that one thing. And I tell you, I go from the best angler in the world to the worst. I lose my confidence for 4 seconds, and I am done. I mean, I literally have to pull up on shore and clear my head, or I have no chance of competing. So I think that's huge. And it happens to everybody. I don't think a lot of people realize that, but confidence and keeping your head in the game is one of the most important tools out there.
That's right. It is, 100%.
Now, I got the last question for you here before we let you go, because, again, this is the same type thing. We were talking about questions when we announced we're having you on. When people across the country, we're having an early spring. Some places had a crazy winter that have a lot of snow, a lot of water. Some places are drier than normal. But when you have rising water conditions, not so much temperature related, but just rising water, how do the bass get affected? How fast do they move with that rising water? What does that, generally speaking, do to bass across the board dealing with rising water? I mean, how do you adjust for that?
I tell you, that's a really good question, because that's one of the hardest things that I have struggled with over the years in my 25 years of doing it. And I notice it happens with all the big name pros that we compete against. We go to places like Major League Fishing last year. It's been on TV recently. Bass Pro sponsors that, and it's one of the most fun TV shows ever to watch. And we fished last May, and the tournaments that have been on Lake Hamilton and Lake Ouachita were filmed last May, and the water rose really quick before we got to that place. And we went out there, and nobody really ever figured out how to catch fish really well in that event. For the lake had as many good fish in it as it did. Nobody really caught them great. So what I do is you first always have to go to the obvious, which is the bushes or the high water stuff. I try to think like a fish and think, if I was out here, that willow bush looks great. I've been looking at it for 3 months out here and seeing it up here on dry land. I'm going to swim up there in it today because the water's high. So I'll go up there and I'll flip the willow bush. If you catch fish in it, then, that's awesome. Go chase the easy thing. But then when that doesn't happen, I usually start to back out. And you always hear the term, the original shoreline, kind of whatever that original shoreline might be. If it's 6 feet high, so it's 6 feet deep on your Lowrance is going to be where that original shoreline is. So that's where I'm going to back out, and I'll start jerk baiting or throwing my crankbait out there on that 6 to 8 foot deep water. And those fish, sometimes when the water rises so quickly, it shocks them and they don't go up there with it. They go and they stay on that same shoreline. And I've seen that happen a lot of times before too. But the worst thing that typically can happen is to get into a real flat area where the water can just spread way back into the trees or way out in the middle of nowhere, so fish really can't be pinpointed. So I like those steeper shorelines, and that's why rock is usually better for that. Those steeper rock type bluffs and banks. That way that the water level's not affecting them too much. But then that original shoreline is what I'll target a lot of times, and that typically gets me more success than going all back in the woods a lot of times.
I think that's a huge tip. Personally speaking, I'm a walleye fishing background. I guide for a lot of bass, but by no means am I a bass tournament angler. And walleye are easy. I mean, the second that water rises, they're in there. They waste like 5 seconds of time, and they're chasing that high water. So at least I know where they're at. But I think the same thing is playing to your strengths. So many people get into those back shallow bays where the water goes up 2 feet. And they gain 600 yards of a lake, and that happens a lot, especially Western, we're talking Kansas, places like this. Like that water comes up a little bit, and it just floods everything, and your fish spread out so bad. So I think the concept of, even though there's places on your lake that are probably doing that, try to find those steeper banks, play to your strengths, try to, put the ball in your court the best you can. I think so many people get caught up in a previous old spot or last year's fishing good. Conditions change, and they keep trying to grind stuff out of their original spots, as opposed to finding the conditions that are going to be best for you and your style. And again, like you said, think like a fish. I mean, again, if you can only change your boat positioning by 20, 30 feet with high water rather than a half mile, obviously that's going to help you out. And you can put your boat in the same spot, make 2 different casts, and cover that entire shore. So I think that's a huge tip to kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's right. And it's always a challenge, and on that Major League Fishing show, I ended up catching them on the Livingston jerkbait with slick, calm, sunny conditions, not typically what we would be doing, but they were out on that original shoreline in that 6 to 9 foot of water. And that was what happened that particular day. It might not have worked 2 days later, but that day I caught fish and survived. And it's like, so if you get to fish one day on Saturday, you got to make whatever works that day work. It might not ever work again, but it might work that day, and that's what you got to run with. And that I'm all about just catching and living that day in the moment, catching fish that day, because that's what everybody wants to do, is catch fish.
That's it, man. Living the moment is absolutely everything. Now, Randy, before we let you go, again, man, it was an absolute honor. And I just got to say, man, I work with a lot of anglers, and I can't say I've ever met anybody that I didn't like in this industry. But man, you're a stand-up guy. You're a family man. I mean, everything about you. You're the guy to look up to. So for all the young people watching, man, you're looking for a hero. This guy's got it going on. Again, you make a lot of right decisions, and we appreciate you as a leader in the industry for just everything you do, morally and just who you are as a person. Now, with that being said, if people want to follow you, let's say they want more Randy in their life, where do we follow you? Websites, social media? How do people follow what you're doing and learn from you?
Man, I appreciate all those kind words, and don't let me be your hero, man. I'm just a fisherman. All those guys that serve in the armed forces and the policemen and all those guys, that's our heroes. But I sure am honored to be looked up to, and I try to be a good role model for all the kids and people just like my kids are 16 and 12. But anyway, follow me on Instagram, Facebook. Instagram is Randy Howell Fishing. Facebook is 2014 Classic Champion Randy Howell, comes up on Facebook. But Instagram's what is really happening now with the younger crowd, and we try to do a lot of stories on Instagram, a lot of pictures, and post tips and different things. And me and my wife Robin do the little show on YouTube called The Catch with Randy and Robin. Let's look us up on YouTube. We're always trying to feed info that's out there that's free, and try to shed a good light on the sport and our faith, and if we can help you catch more fish, help you have a good time in this sport that we love and we're honored to represent, man, that's what we're here to do. So thanks for following us, for sure.
Absolutely, man. Randy, thank you so much for coming on. And, on behalf of everybody out here west in Colorado and everybody else, man, good luck at the Classic. We'd love to see you have 2 titles on that wall, that's for sure.
Well, let's come back on the show and do a show after I win the Classic. Go ahead and say, as if I won the Classic. Let's book another show now. We'll come back and talk.
I would love that. Let's do it right now. Let's put it on the calendar.
Okay. That sounds good, man.
Awesome, Randy. Thank you so much. Enjoy your night, and man, good luck and safe travels.
All right, thank you, Nate. God bless. See you.
You too, man. All right, guys, that was Randy Howell. And I mean, you talk about legendary anglers, a great guy, and somebody that is just in the game. And a person you'd probably never want to fish against. You want to fish with, but not necessarily against, guys. That was Randy Howell. Make sure you give him a follow. Again, always go to his Instagram page, social media outlets, and really watch him on the Bassmaster Classic coming up here very shortly, because again, it's just one of those things that he's the guy to follow for sure. With that being said, he had some great points in there of how you approach early spring bass. You know, and this is a guy who always plays to his strengths. He can fish in any situation, but he knows that shallow crankbite. You know, he knows cranks catch bigger fish. He knows that in that shallow water, he can work the whole column instead of ever overlooking fish in that deeper water. So he knows he can cover water. He can cover a lot of depth in that water column, and he knows he's using a presentation to catch those bigger fish, and he seeks that out. I think that's a huge tip that you talk about, because so many of us, you know, find fish in certain areas and we adapt everything we're doing to catch those fish. If you can catch the fish that you're confident in, catch the fish that you know are the fish that you're looking for, seek out those fish. Even if it's in the strength of numbers. We talk about this a lot of times. We talk about feeding fish. If you have 100 fish that are not feeding in deeper water, digesting their food, they're negative because of a storm, whatever. If you have 100 negative fish, you would rather find the 5 fish sitting on structure that are actively feeding versus the 100 that are not. And that falls right into what Randy was talking about of finding those strengths, finding the fish that you know you can catch. And you're better off to target those fish than the fish that you have less odds of producing and catching on that boat. And a lot of that comes into play with your electronics. Like he was talking about, finding the original shoreline. Electronics are an absolute game changer. And so many of us use them, and so many of us do not use them. So my big thing to you, the angler, is number one, make sure you're using electronics. Make sure you sit down and make sure everything's right. You know, play with your ping speeds, your chart speeds, your colors, your sensitivities. Make sure that you're setting that up to where you can interpret what you're seeing and what it is to you and make sense to you, the angler. It can be different for everybody. But again, spend some time. Make sure your settings are correct. Make sure you're downloading the maps that are available. Because again, all of that's going to change your angling style. And start paying attention to what you're seeing. Look at food. Look at the fish. Look at the migrations. Better understanding what is under the water is the first step in becoming a much better angler that produces more and bigger fish at the end of the day. So guys, again, this whole segment was early spring bass fishing, again with our guest Randy Howell. I hope that you enjoyed it. Guys, it was an awesome show. I know I was excited to be a part of it. Guys, we're going to be going live, I believe, tomorrow night again. Before we let go here, I think it's just going to be me, and it's going to be on the Tightline Outdoor page. So if no matter where you're watching from right now, Bass Pro or Bass Pro Denver, Tightline Outdoors is my personal page in the Tightline Outdoors business. Guys, we do a lot of live hits from that Tightline page. So again, if you want to watch more of this stuff, go over to Tightline Outdoors. Click on that like button, guys. So when we go live, we'll do that. Tomorrow night, I believe we're going to be doing some walleye fishing. As long as the weather doesn't turn crazy, we're going to go out in the evening and do some nighttime walleye fishing. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Again, it's all Tightline Outdoors.
And you can text Tightline to 33222, and we'll send you a notification of when we're going live.
So again, text the word Tightline to 33222, and we'll send you a notification when we're going live. So just text that in your phone right now. Take it out. Type it in, Tightline 33222. When we go live, I'll send you a text telling you we're going live. I'm not going to bother you. Just tell you we're going live, and you can catch the action there. Again, guys, this entire show is Tightline Live. It's brought to you by Bass Pro Shops. Huge thanks to Bass Pro for providing this platform to allow us to go live, allowing us hopefully to make you a better angler. Again, it's all about building that education and making you a better fisherman at the end of the day. So again, huge thanks to Bass Pro. Huge thanks to Bass Pro Denver here regionally. And again, I am your host, Nate Zelinsky. We got Devin Menino behind the camera. And again, guys, our goal is to make you a better fisherman. Whether we're going live in the field on the water or going live in the studio, again, it's going to happen every week. So always make sure you stay tuned. Again, a lot of notifications go out on that Tightline Outdoors Facebook page. And again, we'll also make sure to see all these notifications. Text the word Tightline to 33222. Guys, we'll see you tomorrow night live on the water. We'll also see you next week here in studio. Again, I'm your host, Nate Zelinsky. Thank you so much for watching.